Hello, my lovelies! This is Jenny from Jenny's Fun Facts. We just want to take a moment to thank you so much, Pete Eats Meal Preps, for sponsoring our episodes. New menu out every Friday, ordered by Sunday, delivered fresh by Tuesday, and guess what? They deliver to all Montreal surrounding areas as well. Healthy, fresh, and delivered to your door for free. Add them and our podcast on Instagram at p.eats_P as in Peter, R-E-P as in Peter, S. Thanks, Pete Eats Meal Preps.
Welcome to Noon Hour Out of the Box. This is episode 40. Thank you so much for joining us. Your constant love and support is so appreciated. A huge thank you to Jenny Duhame, our producer, who makes all this happen, and to my co-host, mentor, and good friend, Mr. Robert D'Alessio. How are you today, Robert?
Like always, I'm absolutely excited. We have a really great show for you folks today, so you don't want to leave your seats. This is no time to get the popcorn. You should have gotten it before we went on the air. Esther, do you realize that we're only 10 shows away from hitting the big 5-0 in terms of episodes?
That is unbelievable, Robert. We will definitely have to celebrate, bring out the champagne. It's going to be a big one. I'm really looking forward to it.
So, Esther, you had a little bit of a story to recount concerning Lyme disease, or maybe a little scare you got. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, a few months ago, my boyfriend Fernando developed this sort of bullseye bite on his chest. And, I immediately go to Dr. Google, and it was apparently very similar to what Lyme disease can look like right after you've been bitten by a tick. And in fact, we immediately tried to see if part of the tick was inside. We saw nothing. Of course, I started doing all this research, like I said, and realized that it was so complicated and convoluted and complex and multi-layered, and they were all different things that were suggested and told. It was very, very confusing. In the end, Robert, it ended up being a spider bite.
Oh.
Yeah, but in that short time period, it was a bit of a scare. And the little bit of research that I did, I found it to be very confusing.
But Esther, hang on a sec. It was a spider bite. Have you noticed any strange behavior? Is he climbing up the sides of buildings? Is he spinning webs and jumping from building to building?
Well, there is this strange little web in the closet, but I'm trying to ignore it. So,
Esther, I was alluding to Spider-Man, by the way, Esther.
Yes, I know that. I do know that.
Hey, Esther, listen, now we have an interesting guest who's standing by. So before we go on to bring on our guest, we have to break for program identification.
Today's guest is Laurie Dennis. Laurie Dennis is a registered psychotherapist in private practice in Toronto and the author of Lyme Madness, named the #1 new release in immune system health on Amazon in 2016. More importantly, Laurie is a mother with a son afflicted by chronic or late-stage Lyme disease. She's a fierce advocate for better treatment of Lyme patients and recognition of chronic Lyme disease by the CDC and the IDSA. More recently, Laurie and her husband, Jeff Dennis, co-founded AltHealth.me, a new social media platform and marketplace for people who struggle with chronic health issues. Let's bring her on.
So, ladies and gentlemen, coming to you live from Toronto, Ontario, here is today's guest, Miss Laurie Dennis.
Hey.
Laurie.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to Noon Hour Out of the Box, Laurie.
thank you so much. It was nice to chat with the two of you for a few minutes before, get to know you, and I love your infectious laughter.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have so much to cover over here, so we really have to jump on the gun. Laurie, we're going to open up with the following question. How did you find yourself involved with Lyme disease?
Well, isn't that a loaded question? So it was 10 years ago, which is just hard for me to even believe. And my son became ill just out of the blue all of a sudden. He was living in New York and working there. He's an adult. He's now 34, and he was 24 at the time. And he became very sick, all kinds of weird symptoms. He would faint, and he would have dizziness and brain fog and his gut issues and real exhaustion, like real fatigue. And everything came on sort of one thing at a time, but it was really hard to understand. And then it took us 18 months with about 20 doctors in New York City, which is a pretty sophisticated, cosmopolitan place for medical care. And not one doctor recognized this as Lyme disease. So 20 specialists later, 18 months later, something came across my desk. Something sort of made me think about Lyme disease. And I started to look into it and research it. And before I knew it, I realized that's what he had. And so, unfortunately, I'm the one who had to figure it out, but that's not unusual. It's actually quite common for those with Lyme disease to have to do it themselves. I mean, there was somebody in the community named Chris Newby who wrote a very good book called Bitten, and she coined this phrase of it's a do-it-yourself disease, and that's what it is. And so it left us in a really, really difficult place.
My goodness. And you wrote Lyme Madness. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah. So, in our, let's call it journey. It's an overused word, but in our journey of trying to figure out what was wrong with him and how to help him recover his health, I started to come across such strange information, and it just was so dark and difficult. And I kind of started to gather that information like you'd gather clay, if you're a potter. And before I knew it, I realized I had to write a book about it. And it wasn't even so much to help others. That was not my initial reason for writing it. It was to retain my sanity during the process. So, people think I'm this, incredible philanthropic person that I wrote a book for everybody. No, I wrote it for myself because I couldn't believe what I was learning, understanding, and I felt very alone in this. So I felt this need to get it down. And since then, it's helped a lot of people, and I'm very grateful for that. So it's not like that doesn't matter to me. It matters a lot. But my initial reason for writing a book, which is not an easy thing to do, was to keep my sanity during the process. And so the book ended up being, I think, I haven't looked at it in a long time, but it ended up being about 500 pages, which is a big book.
Wow.
And I probably could have gone on with another 500 pages because there's so much to say about this.
And Laurie, where is this book available? Is it available on Amazon? Is it available in bookstores?
It's on Amazon. Yes, it's on Amazon. And about 4 years ago, I decided I wanted it to be accessible to everybody. So I readjusted the price on Kindle, and it's 99 cents.
What?
Amazing.
Because I don't think people understand. Well, I know I didn't understand this, but maybe a lot of people don't. It's not a profit center. You don't make money on a book. I mean, unless you're Oprah, you don't make money on a book. You do it because you have a need to do it. It's a calling. And so I'm not like it was a cost. It was actually a huge cost. It probably cost me about $50,000 to put this book together. And I self-published. So, I'm just wanting to say that out loud, that it certainly wasn't for any reason other than to gather this information, try to make sense of it, because none of it made sense, and then hopefully help other people along the way, which I know I've done, which is great.
So, Laurie, you co-founded AltHealth.me with your husband, Dennis. Jeff Dennis. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, Jeff Dennis. Your husband, Jeff Dennis.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, it came about because, in the beginning of this Lyme odyssey that we were on, or even throughout, actually, I found the best information, believe it or not. You talked about Dr. Google. The best information was on Facebook. That's where everybody with Lyme disease resided and communicated and shared and supported. So I spent a ton of time, for the first time ever, on Facebook, and that's where I got a lot of my information. And people might, balk at that, but it's Lyme sufferers who understand this illness better than anybody. So I was able to really help my son by being on Facebook. Then eventually Facebook became a place where it didn't feel very safe. It didn't feel very supportive. It was very fractured and very divided and also censored. So we decided that we needed to create a space of our own that would help those who are suffering with this illness and other illnesses to come together, to have a place to congregate, to share ideas, to support each other, and to be able to recover their health. And so we ended up creating AltHealth. Now, Jeff's the one in charge. I'm kind of on the sidelines because I've got my own busy practice every day, but I'm very excited about this because I think that it's critical for people to have a place to go where they feel safe.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And in my own research of Lyme disease, it was difficult to figure and sort of track down exactly what it is. So my question is, what is Lyme disease?
Isn't that the $1 million?
Yeah, seriously.
That's the $1 million question. So I guess it depends on who you ask. But from what I understand in all the years that I've been studying this and trying to understand it, is that it's actually, in essence, an immunosuppressive disease. And, many people will call it an autoimmune disease. It's not. It's an immunosuppressive disease that can lead to autoimmune conditions. It's really complex. It affects everybody who has it from stem to stern. It affects every cell, every organ, every part of your body. It presents in a myriad of ways. There are hundreds of potential symptoms and potential conditions that come from it. But the very common conditions that everybody seems to have are chronic fatigue, brain fog, gut issues, arthritic pain, and then some. But there's hundreds of symptoms that come from it. So, if you want to know how it happens, I can certainly talk about that too. But the jury's still out on exactly how it gets transmitted. I mean, I know that everybody talks about ticks, and that's what the media focuses on, and that's what everybody focuses on. But I'm not convinced that ticks are the only way that it gets transmitted.
So this disease, a Lyme disease, is it contagious?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think that there's enough solid evidence to say that it can be sexually transmitted, but I do know that there's a ton of evidence, a very large body of evidence that speaks to the fact that it can be congenitally transmitted. So mother to fetus. So yes.
Wow.
Yes.
So you spoke about this a bit, and it seems very complicated and convoluted, but what are the symptoms of Lyme disease?
Right. So I mean, I guess I should have come prepared with the 100 symptoms, but it's so varied, and it's such a spectrum. Some people end up being bedbound, homebound, completely non-functioning. Others can be more functioning, but it's everything from, again, chronic fatigue, which is not just being tired. It's very different than people saying, I didn't sleep last night, I'm tired. It's like a bone tired. It's like tired to the very essence of your cells. And then on top of that, there is nausea and pain and brain fog and dizziness. And oh my goodness, the list goes on and on, allergic reactions and mast cell activation. And oh God, I can't even think right now. I'm just so overwhelmed with how many symptoms there can be. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a very, very, very difficult illness because it really affects you again, from stem to stern. It doesn't let up. It's unrelenting, and it really makes people feel non-functioning.
So, Laurie, tell us, what is chronic Lyme disease?
Right. So again, it's this immunosuppressive condition where your immune system is detonated by the tick. If it's a tick that transmits it, because I think there are other ways that you can get it. But it really detonates the immune system so it doesn't function properly. So then what happens is the immune system, the floodgates open to opportunistic infections and retroviruses, like EBV. And I would say in all my research, and I don't know how many doctors will concur, but I really know from what I understand that EBV, which is Epstein-Barr virus, which is mono, is actually the underlying disease mechanism that keeps this chronic.
Wow.
So what happens is because the immune system is no longer working properly, again, it opens up to, it can't fight against all of these things that we all have in our bodies because we are, filled with all kinds of bacteria, but our immune system is meant to keep it at bay. But when your immune system, like AIDS, just like AIDS, when your immune system isn't working well, then you can't fight these things off. So that's why when you ask what are the symptoms, it's almost too overwhelming to be able to even list them all because, again, it presents differently from person to person.
It sounds like the great imitator. How is it diagnosed?
Well, it's interesting you're saying that, because that is what it's known as. It's known as the new great imitator. Syphilis was the great imitator. Lyme disease is the new great imitator. How is it diagnosed? It's not diagnosed. That's the problem. I mean, certainly if you're living in Canada, you're out of luck. You're out of luck, because what they're going to use is the age-old, ineffective, standardized testing, which is the ELISA and the Western blot. And unfortunately, they come back with a tremendous number of false positives. So if you're looking for a proper diagnosis, you're not going to get it in this country.
And why is it so hard to diagnose Lyme disease?
Whew, that's a loaded question. I'm going to have to get into the politics, which,
Go ahead.
Yeah. So here's what I've learned, that first of all, the first real outbreak of Lyme disease happened in the 70s in Old Lyme, Connecticut. And if you look at some of the research articles around that time, they describe it much more accurately. And I can give you evidence of that. But then by 1994, the powers that be, we'll just call it that, got together at a conference in Dearborn, Michigan, and they determined that they were going to reconfigure or redefine this illness in a way that was much more limited. So they redefined the illness to make it into an arthritic condition. Why? Well, this is going to be controversial, but this is why. They were trying to get a vaccine to market in 1998, and they had to make sure that the two matched, that the case definition matched the vaccine and how it was being created and the testing methods. And so as a result, what happened in 1994 is that chronic neurological Lyme disease got wiped off the map as if it doesn't exist. So then it gets trickled down to doctors, all that information, and they don't have any education on it. They don't understand it. They don't know how to diagnose it. They don't see it for what it is, which in the end is the biggest heartbreak. Because, we all grow up, especially in Canada, we grow up thinking that the medical system is there to support us and there to help us. And with people who have chronic Lyme, that is just not the case. In fact, they are abandoned, neglected, negated, gaslighted, turned away and made to feel like they're crazy.
Which seems to be very common with a lot of the chronic autoimmune disorders that people experience. Certainly years ago, that's how many patients were treated.
Yes.
So the rule of thumb is that it's caused by a tick or a bite from a tick. So what should someone do if they are in fact bitten by a tick?
Right. So if they're infected by a tick, so that's early stage. And if you're lucky enough, and I mean that, if you're lucky enough to see the tick that bites you, because that's a very small percentage of those who end up being sick with this, then you go to your doctor and you don't ask, you demand 28 days of antibiotics, and hopefully you'll catch it in time. And that's a 10-day window. So by the time you get bitten, you've got to get on this and within 10 days. Otherwise, it turns into this chronic neurological condition.
So what's the advice you can give to people to avoid getting the Lyme disease? How could we, what can we do to help ourselves so that we don't predispose ourselves to be able to contract the disease?
So, I mean, of course, like with anything, you've got to keep yourself healthy, strong, and all the rest, and keep your immune system strong, because not everybody who gets bitten by a tick gets this sick. So I think that's important, but also you have to kind of check yourself when you're out in a park or on, hiking or on grass anywhere. You have to check yourself for ticks, and especially during the warmer seasons. But ticks actually survive all year long, and so it's a misnomer to think that, or misconception to think that you only see ticks in the spring and summer. That's just not true. So you have to check yourself if you're out in any kind of wooded area or any kind of grassy place to make sure that you haven't been bitten. And Esther, you said that your boyfriend found a bullseye. So you did the right thing. You did the research and you went straight to the doctor. And, they, I guess, recognize it as a spider bite. I hope that is the case. And I think that's all you can do. That's what you need to do, and get yourself informed. Also, spray, of course, any kind of tick spray during the summer and spring months is important.
Yeah, Cheryl Siegel said it sounds like fibromyalgia, similar symptoms, and also hard to diagnose. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It is. So that's the thing, because Lyme is called the new great imitator for that. Yeah. Because it actually is a combination of fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, it's like a whole kitchen sink of things. So yes, and so it really gets misdiagnosed for that reason too.
So how many people do you believe actually have Lyme disease?
So I mean, this is 4 years ago when I was really in the thick of this. I would have said tens of millions,
Wow.
because it's around the globe. I mean, I remember when we first realized that it was chronic Lyme, we went to our first Lyme literate doctor, and he made a joke, which wasn't that funny, that, that ticks don't cross the border from the US to Canada. And we thought,
Oh,
what? But this was actually common rhetoric. The ticks don't cross the border. I mean, how inane is that? So the truth, though, is that I've spoken to people from Germany and from Austria and from, oh my goodness, London, England, like all over the world. And this exists everywhere, everywhere. So it's not just old Lyme, Connecticut. It's not just, indigenous to certain areas. It's actually across the globe. And so I would say tens of millions, and it's always underreported.
so Laurie, is this more prevalent in certain locations, certain places?
I actually don't think it is. I think that's a misconception. I think that, again, we want to be very careful in grassy areas, parks and woods and all of that. But it can be found anywhere, or these ticks can be found anywhere. And so I think that's important to know that you're not safe anywhere with regard to Lyme disease, and you've got to just be vigilant.
Is there any kind of help for people who have been diagnosed with this and they feel they're not being treated adequately in the health system? Are there any support groups such as psychological treatment that can get somewhere?
Well, first of all, that's why we created AltHealth, so that people could come together and have their own support groups and really, take care of each other, because that's what it looks like in the Lyme world. You're not going to get a ton of professionals helping. But, in terms of support, psychological support, there are Lyme literate therapists out there. I guess I'm one of them. And I see a number of Lyme sufferers in my practice. It just makes sense that they need to be able to talk about this, because they're suffering not just from the illness itself, which is very difficult psychologically, because you've lost so much. You've lost your health. You've often lost your job, your ability to function, your relationships, because there's a lot of acrimony in families and in friendships because people don't understand this. And then Lyme sufferers end up feeling very alone. And then, of course, when you're turned away by the medical system and not supported, that creates a real psychological problem and emotional neglect. And so, I think that coming together as a group on AltHealth is really a great way to support each other. That's where my support came from on Facebook for those many years, until it wasn't supportive anymore, for a lot of reasons. So I think that's what people need to do. And they can look for a Lyme literate therapist. There's somebody who put together a list. I think the website is called lymetree.org. And she put together a list of Lyme literate therapists, I think, across North America.
Okay, thank you so much. This information has been amazing, and I'm sure a lot of people appreciate what we discussed today.
I'm glad.
Well, a quick recap for the audience. This is Laurie's book, Lyme Madness. And as Laurie mentioned, you can get it on Amazon. And once again, Laurie, if you can repeat where else the audience can get this book?
It's primarily on Amazon. It used to be in other places. Now it's on Amazon. I have it in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. And the Kindle is 99 cents. So
amazing.
I did that purposely because I want it to be accessible to anybody who can benefit from it.
That is such a kind act and a great way to share your experience. Thank you so much for coming on to our show today, Laurie, and sharing your experience, which of course is not easy. You're personally touched with this. Your son is afflicted by the disease. So thank you once again. Thank you, Esther, so much for being such an amazing co-host. Thank you to our producer, Jenny Duhame, who always does a fantastic job. Esther, just let the audience know what is coming up tomorrow night on your show on Esther's Breeze.
So tomorrow, Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will have psychic medium Mr. Artie Hoffman, and he's going to probably do a reading on me. Yikes. And he's open to answer any questions. So, guys, you have to come on live, ask your questions. He's more than happy to answer them. He's a riot.
And that's a show you do not want to miss, folks. That's tomorrow night. You can watch Esther on the Esther's Breeze YouTube channel on her show, Esther's Breeze. You can also watch her on the Bobby Short Shorts YouTube channel and, of course, on Esther's personal Facebook page. A reminder to each and every one of you that you can watch the extended version of Noon Hour Out of the Box every Saturday on accessradio.ca. That's between noon and 3 p.m. Of course, there's more excitement in store. You don't want to miss that as well. So as we bid farewell to everybody and hope you have a great week, Esther, you get the last word.
Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next week. Ciao for
Bye.
now.
Bye, everybody.